Hi everybody, welcome to my office at home. This is a video which is going to cover some of the contents of the World Radio and TV Handbook 1981 edition. And the reason why I want to do this is because it's right smack bang in the middle of the period of time from when I first got interested in radio to when I actually got my first shortwave receiver, which was many years later. I had been planning to do a video covering this book. I got it with 3 others as a job lot from Harwell Amateur Radio Society rally 2, 3, 4 years ago. I can't remember, it must be longer than that actually, because I don't think they've done one since lockdown in 2020. And I even had the post-its in it to remind me which pages to pay particular attention to, but I never got around to it. Anyway, the other night I pulled all the post-its out and then realised, hang on a minute, I haven't actually covered this yet. So and because it's right bang in the middle of that period prior to me actually obtaining my first shortwave radio, the contents of this book, i.e. what was on shortwave at the time, is basically what I missed, because I didn't actually get a radio until 1984 when I got my Amstrad 6010 or 6011 analog receiver. So I thought, well, let's have a look at this book, because this was it felt like I'd just gone to secondary school, been there a couple of years, and the peak of my interest in radio was around that time. And I had a look at this book again last night, and it was quite surprising actually, some of the stuff that's in here that's kind of relevant to what I'm doing today. So 1981 edition, the 35th edition, over 60,000 in print. I don't know what the print volumes are these days for the WRTH. I'm assuming less. So let's take a look. So the editor was J.M. Frost of Denmark. Never heard of him, but this was what really caught me straight away. So straight away, here, there and everywhere, the Trio Kenwood R1000. As you guys know, I've got one of these. And there's a whole page advert for it in the 1981 edition. This radio features several times on advertisements throughout this book, but easy tuning, digital display, professional quality, all that stuff. It's a great radio. Obviously, you know, I've got one. So easy to use, completely straightforward. Excuse me. Would definitely suit someone new to the hobby, because you really sort of can't go wrong with it. Excuse me while I take a slurp of tea. But great to see that. Mine is actually branded Trio. Obviously there were both options. I guess it depends what which market they were being delivered to. I don't know, but great to see that. 1981. And then I saw something else, which also Saudi Arabia, was this. Get fast delivery of power tubes of all types from its bonded warehouse at the Zurich airport. Contact Varian AG. So I used to work for Varian. In fact, I worked for Varian from 2006 until they were bought out by Agilent Technologies. So I hadn't noticed this previously actually, but I actually worked for Varian. And then to open the 1981 edition of the WRTH and find a power tube, vacuum tube advertisement from Varian. I didn't even know they made tubes. I mean, they probably didn't. I'm sure they didn't when I worked for them. But to see that ad from Varian was brilliant. So let's just keep going. I'm not going to go through this every page of this book. There's a couple of Grundig adverts actually. The Satellite 3400 Professional. Don't know anything about it. I've seen this radio. I'm not sure about the aesthetics of this radio with the 3 separate analog tuning dials. I'm sure it's been well engineered. Grundig radios were. Yacht Boy 120. Used to lust after that radio when I was a kid. Whole page advert again. And if we keep going, some other stuff in here, but can't cover all of it. So Webster Radio Inc. Fresno, California. So these are the radios of the time. So the Yaesu FRG 7700, obviously I've got one of those. The Yaesu FRG 7, so still for sale. at the same time as the FRG 7700 came out, and the Kenwood R1000. So these were obviously the radios of the time. Great to see that. And then I saw this, an advertisement for Radio Moscow, and that really sort of piqued my interest because I used to listen to Radio Moscow a lot when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. And the reason for it is because they used to broadcast, if my memory serves me correctly, they used to broadcast on 1,500 kilohertz is what I remember, on medium wave with a very strong signal, and they used to broadcast in English all evening, and I used to listen to Radio Moscow and also Radio Tirana from Albania a lot on medium wave, because at the time I didn't have a shortwave radio. When in 1981 I definitely had a radio with medium wave and long wave, I think, and Hitachi, and it's probably appeared in some video or some, I don't have it now, but in maybe that Radio Memories video that I did. So to see an advertisement for Radio Moscow, yeah, round the clock in its English language world service and daily to all over Europe, Africa, everywhere basically. Radio Moscow was everywhere, and a very one of the strongest signals on medium wave. So great to see that. Right, ham radio outlet. United States, so they were in Anaheim, Burlingame, Oakland, San Diego, Van Nuys, all throughout California. And again, the R1000 appears, as does the FRG 7700, amongst other leading brands. So again, two of the big receivers of the day in 81. And we've got some schedules and what have you. And then there's a Yaesu Electronics Corp full-page advertisement for the FRG 7700, the new high-performance communications receiver. $599 without memory, $715 with memory. So there's another advert a bit later on actually in this where it's got pricing for this and the JRC NRD 515 and another radio. So I've had mine refurbished a few years ago, and hopefully it's good for another sort of 40 odd years. But quite clearly the FRG 7700 was big news in 1981. Some more schedules. Right, here we go. Here's an advert from JRC, Japan Radio Company, the legendary NRD 515 with a separate memory unit, which I've never seen before. Until I saw this advert, I didn't realise that there was such a item existed. Yeah, advanced radio technology combined with the newest digital technology. The NRD 515 is an up conversion type double superhet, full of performance advantages, blah blah blah. Well, obviously most of you know I've got a 525, which is exceptional. I've only ever read good things about the 515 as well, actually, so never used one, never actually seen one in the flesh, but it says it all really, doesn't it? WRTH 1981 JRC full-page advertisement for the 515. I mean, it's brilliant. Makes me wish that I'd been born a couple of decades earlier, really, sort of. You know what I mean. Practical Wireless, advertisement for Practical Wireless. I mean, this magazine's been going, I can't remember, since the 30s probably. So full-page advertisement for Practical Wireless. Just goes to show how different times were back then. So good to see that. I'd forgotten about that. Right, Gilfer, North America's shortwave mail order place. Where were they? They were Park Ridge, New Jersey. So here we've got some pricing. So the Drake R7 in 81 was $1,700, or in that range. The Yaesu FRG 7700 was only $725 in that range, and the JRC NRD 525 was in the range of $1,500. So the NRD 515 was more than twice as expensive as the Yaesu FRG 7700. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't worth it, I don't know. The people out there that actually know the answer to that question, is the performance of the 515 such that it would have been worth more than twice the money of a FRG 7700? Answers on a postcard. What a great advertisement. And they've been around 28 years. Radio Canada International. I was interviewed by them live on air a few years ago. Someone there saw some of my reception videos for their signal on medium wave. It was probably their transmission on 750 kilohertz. Anyway, they contacted me and said, can we interview you live on air? So they rang my mobile phone, and I was like literally interviewed by one of their DJs for about 10 minutes about DXing and how on earth I can hear their signal. So I had to explain magnetic loops to them and propagation and paths and what have you. So good to see that. Shame that they're gone. Right, so now that we've sort of covered hardware in this book, I just wanted to do a quick comparison of how much was actually on shortwave back then as sort of compared to now. So we've got here, so this is Mexico, okay? Now, in 2025, there's only one shortwave transmission from Mexico, and that's radio education on 6185 kilohertz. And what's interesting is if you look at this book from 81, 6185 kilohertz radio education. However, that is only one of 20 stations on shortwave. So Mexico in 81 had 20 stations broadcasting on shortwave from 2390 kilohertz, what's that, 120 meters, all the way to 17765. How amazing would it be if that was the case today? So, and in 2025, there's one. So do I feel like I've missed out? Definitely. Go to Brazil, and if you take a look at the 2025 edition of the WRTH, and I keep plugging this book because it's just superb. There are 13 stations left on shortwave in Brazil, and I know because I've spent months in rural Brazil, and I've seen firsthand how the sort of rural population still rely on shortwave for music, sports, news, education. Brazil is a huge country and doesn't have the infrastructure when you sort of get out of the big cities and towns and what have you. But there's 13 left on shortwave. Back in 1981, well, the shortwave stations start here in this book. You may not, I don't know how good the resolution is going to be. The shortwave station started on 2310, Radio Progresso, Sousa, and by frequency, just keep going down to the bottom of the page, turn the page over, Radio Education Rural, is it Tefe? On 3315, anyway, just keep going down that page and just keep going. And you only get to 4835 kilohertz, Radio Evangelica, Corumba. And then you just kind of like keep going to the bottom of the next page. And you only get to 11895 kilohertz. And you eventually finish on 17815 kilohertz, Radio Cultura Sao Paulo. So back in 1981, there were 126 stations on shortwave in Brazil. I'm just going to look. Powers were, and mostly measured in kilowatts of power. So 1 kilowatt, 250. Some of them were low power, 250 watts. No, sorry, that's 250 kilowatts. 1 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt. They were all. I can't find anything below 1 kilowatt. Oh, okay, 0.25. So that's 250 watts. So there's odd one, but mostly, with reasonable power, that you'd have a good chance of DXing a lot of those stations. 126. Today they're 13. I'm grateful for the 13, but it just goes to show how things have changed. Right, let's go to Colombia, and in 2025 there are 2 shortwave stations in Colombia, and just so as I don't actually get this wrong, because I don't spend a lot of time listening to them. So you've got, Al Caravan Radio on 5910 kilohertz, and I've copied that station, but not for years. Apparently they transmit with 3 kilowatts, but I don't know what their azimuth is. I don't know what direction they record, but I have copied them weekly years ago. And Radio La Voz de Tu Conciencia is 5 kilowatts on 6010 kilohertz. So there's 2 left in 2025 from Colombia. And back in 1981, there was, starting on 4755 kilohertz, all of these down to here, there's actually 58 stations broadcasting from Columbia in 1981, and now there's 2. So, you know, makes you want to be alive in, not I was alive in 1981, but be alive in 1981 with an excellent shortwave radio and a decent antenna. And then finally we go to Peru. Now in 2025 in Peru, there's actually quite a few. There's 10 shortwave stations in Peru. They're low power. In fact, if I again consult my WRTH 2025 edition, which is the right thing to do, a lot of these I've copied. So you've got Radio Huanta 2000 on 4752 kilohertz. I've copied them. I've certainly copied them when I was in Brazil. Radio Tama, obviously, on 4775. Radio Logos on 4810, which I've copied many times, although it's usually weak. And then you've got Radio Sender Christiana on 4820, which I'm not sure I have copied. And then, anyway, so the list goes on. And you've got, so that's a total of 10. In 1981, there were 86 Peruvian shortwave stations. Unbelievable, really. Starts here, all the way down to the page, and keep going. And, you know, there's more examples. There's loads more examples I could use, but it just goes to show that the landscape with shortwave was very different back in the day. However, there's one other thing I wanted to show you. Well, actually, there's 2 more things I wanted to show you. There's some receiver reviews. And one that caught my eye, there's some Panasonic radios here that I don't really know much about, but the Sony ICF 2001 is reviewed. I think it came out in 1980. Shortwave radio performance is only fair, but then goes on to say how brilliantly easy it is to use because it's just direct frequency input, push button, and you're where you need to be on a band. One of the downsides to this radio is that it didn't have any sort of linear sort of tuning, like a tuning knob basically, so you could sort of, you know, you can use the scan function, but that was never very good. So portability good, shortwave radio performance fair, ease of operation excellent, and that's the sort of overall review for the Sony ICF 2001, the world's first portable digital direct frequency input shortwave radio. And there's a few others in here that are quite interesting, but not enough to share with you guys. You guys know all about this stuff anyway. What is interesting is a Tropical Bands Reception sort of piece by Anka Peterson and Carol Fail. And it was interesting. There's a comment on here. So this is for the tropical bands. So 120, 1960 meter bands, okay? And they've done like an assessment. In 1981, there were 687 transmitters on air in the tropical bands. Can you imagine that? 687 different broadcasters from 2.3 megahertz to sort of 5 megahertz. 687. Imagine with all those analog radios how absolutely bursting at the seams the bands would be. However, what the comment is, that number 687 is a decrease from 751 transmitters registered by DXs in 1974. So in 7 years, the number of transmitters on the tropical bands actually decreased from 751 to 687. And the decrease apparently is caused particularly by the move from shortwave to medium wave or FM of home service transmitters in Africa and Indonesia. So there you go. I thought it was interesting. I read that, the first time I read that I thought, oh right, so was the decline in shortwave, did it actually start to occur, you know, a decade or more before the fall of the Berlin Wall? And it seems that actually it was in decline. But obviously the fact the Cold War kept shortwave as a medium, you know, a popular medium for international broadcasters and etc. for, you know, many years. So the bands were still pretty crowded in sort of 1989 when in 89-90 when the Berlin Wall came down. But that was really interesting to see that even in 1981 there'd been a decline from 1974. So when the real golden age of radio was, I don't kind of really know. But that was interesting. I need to take the time to read the rest of that report at some point. And then finally, on the inside back cover, there she is, the Sony ICF 2001. Just going to take a slug of tea. They say never meet your heroes. I met my hero. I bought it second hand a few years ago, and the performance was about fair. it was nowhere near as sensitive, obviously, or selective as its as the follow-up radio, the 2001D or the 2010. But what it was incredibly susceptible to RFI. So any sort of electrical noise in the house, this thing would pick it up. And eventually, actually, mine died anyway. It stopped working. But of course, 45 years ago, this was an incredible piece of kit. So yeah, I've never seen this. I've seen this picture before, but I've never actually seen this advert. So there you go. That was the back cover. So there you go. So that's the world of shortwave in 1981, when I was a little kid, right smack bang in the middle of my interest in radio and shortwave in particular. Several years after I first got interested, but several years before I actually got a shortwave radio, so I never got to tune the bands when there were 687 stations on the tropical bands. But there you go. Can read about it now. And there was a comment recently online, more than one, where it's being suggested that, given the state of the world these days, that maybe there's a time that the time and the place is now to bring back shortwave. Due to potential loss of other types of information technology infrastructure, and also to beat censorship, etc. Couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed that trip down memory lane. It kind of made me wish I'd been born 20 years earlier, but in reality, that's only because I feel like I've missed the best times of shortwave. But as I said in my previous video, there's still a hell of a lot to listen to, and get your radios out tonight, switch them on, and appreciate what's left on shortwave, because as I said, there's still a lot of interesting stuff, and it's still worth the time and the effort to check out the bands, and I do nearly every night. Thanks for watching, guys. 7-3.